Hello, everyone. Before we get started, let's go over something that we talked about before. If you remember, we talked about photosynthesis. We said photosynthesis, keeping it as simple as possible, is the way that plants make their own food by using the energy from the sun. They're able to take in carbon dioxide from the air and water from the ground, and with sunlight, they make glucose, very special sugar, and as a byproduct, oxygen. We will get to more complicated or more in-depth explanation of it once again, because I do believe repetition is going to help you to remember the details. But what I want you to remember now is that process, because when we study aerobic and anaerobic respiration, we are essentially looking at the opposite reaction. Cellular respiration is how animals and humans, we break down that glucose to get energy. Yes, plants do it for themselves as well, but we do it as well. We take in oxygen, that incredible byproduct that plants make. We eat food that gives us glucose, and our cells use that to make ATP. ATP is the energy that we need to think, to move, to just function. And we breathe out carbon dioxide. And guess what? Water, we produce it as a waste product. So you can think of photosynthesis as energy capture and cellular respiration as energy release. There are different kinds of cellular respiration. Aerobic respiration needs oxygen to occur. But when there is no oxygen, cells can still perform respiration, and it is called anaerobic respiration. So what is aerobic respiration? Like I already mentioned, oxygen is present and it is used to break down the substrates that are needed to help the process continue. What substrate am I talking about? Sugar. Glucose, it's broken down, and the energy that is contained within its chemical bonds is released. The first stage of respiration happens in the cytoplasm, but then it moves into the mitochondria. Now, before I go into the mitochondria, I want you to remember, where did photosynthesis happen? Hopefully, in your mind, you just thought photosynthesis happens in the chlorophyll, in the chloroplast. The chloroplasts contain chlorophyll, and that pigment was very important as a part of the process of photosynthesis. If you remember, there were two parts to photosynthesis. There were the reactions that required energy from light and the reactions that did not require energy from light. We will review those in more detail as well. Now, aerobic respiration happens in the mitochondria. And these mitochondria are just as special as those chloroplasts were. And you'll see that some of the processes are very similar. Here's the equation for aerobic cellular respiration. You have glucose and oxygen. Those enter into the cell, and the cell goes through a process of reactions, and as a result produces carbon dioxide, water, and energy is released. If you remember photosynthesis, this is the complete opposite of that reaction. So most organisms do need oxygen in order to survive. There are some that can continue to live when there is no oxygen. That's anaerobic respiration. If you've ever been working out and you feel like your muscles are starting to hurt in this very specific way, which you probably know what I'm talking about, then you can now think of that as those muscles building up lactic acid. Lactic acid is one way in which respiration can occur without oxygen. So in muscles, as an example, sugar or glucose can be converted into lactic acid and energy when there is no oxygen. Is it the best way? No. However, it's better than nothing. And when our bodies are working really, really hard, muscles can have less oxygen being pumped into them because of the constriction of the vessels. And you feel that buildup of lactic acid in your muscles. Now, one that I particularly love because I used to love baking my bread. I don't do it as much anymore, but I do plan on starting again, is what happens in yeast. Now, yeast don't produce lactic acid when they are without oxygen. What they do with that glucose is they break it down and produce ethanol, which is an alcohol, and carbon dioxide, and some energy. So when we put yeast into our bread, when we're baking that bread, it is producing these beautiful bubbles and making it be able to rise and taste really good. And it also produces alcohol, but if you've had bread, you probably realize this bread doesn't taste like alcohol. Well, that's because we bake it, and when we heat it up in that way, it causes all of the alcohol to evaporate. Very different when it comes to alcoholic products like beer. Yeast is also in beer. Beer is not heated. If you heat it, the alcohol leaves, but because it is not heated, the alcohol stays. Some plants can also do anaerobic respiration. All that is needed for anaerobic respiration is a lack of oxygen. If there is no oxygen and the organism can produce or go into producing energy through any form, it'll do anaerobic respiration if possible. So let's look at the two differences. In aerobic respiration, there's a large amount of energy being released. In anaerobic respiration, there's less energy being released. In aerobic respiration, you have oxygen being present, and in anaerobic respiration, oxygen is absent, or it is just not enough to use to continue the process. In aerobic respiration, you have glucose being completely used up, and in anaerobic respiration, it is inefficient. It is impossible of using all of it. So this is just a very basic introduction into the differences between aerobic and anaerobic respiration. We will go into more detail now after this quiz. Let's see what you remember. What is respiration? Is it the process by which food is digested by digestive organs? Is it the mechanical motion of inhaling and exhaling? Or is it a chemical process which occurs in the body to release energy? Yes, it is a chemical process which occurs in the body to release energy. Where does aerobic respiration occur? Is it in the mitochondria? Is it in the cytoplasm? Or is it in the nucleus? Yes, it is in the mitochondria. What are the reactants for aerobic respiration? Do we need glucose and oxygen? Just glucose or just oxygen? Yes, glucose and oxygen. What are the products for aerobic respiration? Is it lactic acid, carbon dioxide and water, or glucose and water? Yes, we produce carbon dioxide and water. What is the reactant for anaerobic respiration? Glucose, oxygen, or carbon dioxide? Glucose. What is a product for anaerobic respiration? Glucose, oxygen, or lactic acid? Lactic acid is one of the ways. Maybe you remember what the other one is. Now, this one is a little bit more of a critical thinking question. What's it called when you breathe heavily after exercise? Is it excess post-exercise glucose consumption or excess post-exercise oxygen consumption or excess post-exercise respiration consummation? It's called EPOC. EPOC is your body using extra oxygen after exercise to restore the balance. You have lost so much oxygen in your heavy workout, and now your body is trying to bring in more oxygen. Why? What did you just learn is needed in order to produce more energy? As soon as you stop working out and your muscles are able to start releasing, getting rid of that lactic acid, it needs to replace it, and excess oxygen is absolutely needed to have that process occur. Which type of respiration releases more energy? Is it the aerobic respiration, the anaerobic respiration, or do they release the same amount? Yeah, aerobic respiration. Which type of respiration has a faster rate of reaction? Which one occurs quicker? Is it aerobic respiration, anaerobic respiration, or do they react at equal rates? It's anaerobic. Remember, aerobic respiration occurs in the mitochondria. It needs to go through a set of processes in the mitochondria. Anaerobic doesn't need to do that. Anaerobic respiration occurs in the cytoplasm of the cell, and it just happens very quickly there and produces what it needs to produce depending upon the organism. And where does anaerobic respiration happen? I just said it. Is it in the mitochondria? Is it in the cytoplasm? Or is it in the nucleus? In the cytoplasm. All right, so that's the end of the quiz. And that was a simple introduction into it. And we're going to go a little bit deeper into how the process functions now. All right, let's look at cellular respiration again. We're going to be defining cellular respiration, identifying the main stages of cellular respiration, and hopefully you'll be able to explain how energy flows and how ATP is produced. All right, here is your equation one more time. The C6H12O6, that's your glucose. The oxygen is the O2, and those are your reactants. That's what is needed. And then it yields, that's what the arrow means, carbon dioxide, that's a CO2, water, that's the H2O, and the wonderful little molecule called ATP, which is the one that has energy that can be used by the cell. It is the energy currency of the cell. Therefore, cellular respiration is the process in which the food that you ingest becomes energy that you can use. Okay, so we have glycolysis occurring in the cytoplasm. We have, which is the first stage, right? Then we have the Krebs cycle, the second stage, and the electron transport chain, the third stage, occurring in the mitochondria. We know the importance of this energy, not only for the food, for the things that we have to do and move and run and whatever whatever physical thing we have to do, but also for our brains. remembering that our brains use 20% of our body's energy just to think, just to remember, just to have reactions. So let's look at glycolysis a little more in depth. As you can see, glycolysis in this picture is outside of the mitochondria, and that is because glycolysis happens in the cytosol. It happens in that jelly fluid that the organelles are in. It is not required to be in any organelle. It just occurs in the cell. So as soon as glucose comes into the cell, it gets broken down into what two molecules that we call pyruvate. Pyruvate. That pyruvate enters into the mitochondria, and the second stage of cellular respiration occurs, which is called the Krebs cycle. In the Krebs cycle, the mitochondria charges these electron carriers. It happens in the matrix, which I'll show you in a minute. And then it goes on to the third stage, the electron transport chain, which uses oxygen to generate that ATP. Remember how important that ATP is. Now, that oxygen is also incredibly important because it is able to bind with all of those excess hydrogens in order to create water and not harm us, because water is something that we can perfectly process, and it removes what we call free radicals, and it keeps us from basically dying as a result of this process. We'll go more into that in detail as all right, so glycolysis. Again, it occurs in the cytoplasm. Glycolysis doesn't even need any oxygen to happen. It just gets the glucose, splits it into pyruvate. It cuts it in half, essentially. Now, it does need some energy in order to cut it in half. So while it needs about 2 ATP to get started, we call that the investment phase. It's like I'm putting some money in to make sure that this happens. It does produce 4 ATP at the end and 2 NADHs, which are really important. So in the end, it actually ends up gaining 2 ATP and 2 NADHs. Now, whether you go into aerobic or anaerobic respiration, this initial stage is always going to happen. So you're always going to have a tiny bit of energy, but as you're going to see, this is very, very small amount of energy compared to the amount of energy that can occur in the mitochondria. This is the same initial step, whether the cell is going to go into aerobic or anaerobic. All of it, everyone starts off with glycolysis, in which the glucose is split into pyruvate. Both types of respiration. And I just wanted to remind you that the mitochondria has a double bilayer of lipids, of phospholipids. And if you remember from before, when we talked about the phospholipid bilayer in cells, when we talked about the phospholipid bilayer in chloroplasts, now the phospholipid bilayer in mitochondria, you know what this phospholipid bilayer is good for now. It is great at keeping things out that need to be out and keeping things in that need to be in. It regulates what comes in and out. And that's always going to be important because the cell uses that in order to generate energy by turning something, by making things go with their concentration gradient or against their concentration gradient. Now let's go into the Krebs cycle. In the matrix, which is inside the inner membrane of the mitochondria, the pyruvate that came in as a result of glycolysis, joins with coenzyme A. When the pyruvate joins coenzyme A, it creates something called acetyl-CoA. It's called a cycle because it continuously comes back to the same molecule, oxaloacetate. The acetyl-CoA that we just mentioned, it actually ends up going into the cycle, and you end up having carbon dioxide produced and electron carriers ready to take those hydrogens and electrons into the next stage of this process, which is the electron transport chain. As a reminder of the importance of the cycle, that carbon dioxide, you know where it goes? To your lungs, and you breathe it out. And if you remember photosynthesis, it is an absolutely important reactant to that process. So you can see once again how interconnected photosynthesis and cellular respiration are. One of the really important things that you need to understand about this step in cellular respiration is that the electron carriers, NADH and FADH, they not only carry electrons but also protons. And as they're going through in the membrane of the mitochondria, electrons are moving through the membrane. And this is not just one, there's many electron transport chains throughout the entire membrane, inner membrane of the mitochondria. And all of them are there to do the same thing, to transfer electrons through the membrane, through specific proteins embedded in the membrane, as these electron carriers donate their electrons. Remember, the electron carriers, NADH and FADH, as they donate their electrons, they also release protons. Remember, protons are the hydrogens. So these hydrogens, they start piling up. And what did we learn way back when? Things in all of our biology tend to go from where there's a lot to where there's a little. So because they start piling up, they naturally get pumped out of the inner membrane and into what is called the intermembrane space. So it's the space between the squiggly inner membrane and the outer membrane of the mitochondria. So they naturally, as they're getting released, the electrons are going through the different proteins, protons are being released, they naturally go from where there's a lot to where there's a little. So they naturally go out into the intermembrane space, which creates a high concentration in the intermembrane space of hydrogen. So what happens? They're only allowed in through one specific one. There is only one protein which allows the hydrogen ions to come back in. And that's done on purpose, because now all of this high concentration of hydrogen needs to come back into the cell, gets brought back into the cell through something called ATP synthase. It's not a fancy name. Synthesis, like making something, ATP. So as it brings the hydrogens through, it adds a phosphate to ADP. And when it does that, it becomes ATP, which is, like I said before, the energy currency of the cell. This is what is used to send it out and just donate phosphates and generate energy throughout the entire body. As it does this, so this is called chemiosmosis. As it does this, ATP is generated, and it's a lot of ATP. It is so much ATP in the 30s compared to the measly 2 we did with glycolysis. So we see that this is a highly efficient way for there to be energy produced for the cell. So if oxygen is present, this is going to happen. What does oxygen do? Oxygen is really important because as these electrons flow through the electron transport chain, They end up at the end just dead, like, we let all our energy out. And what happens to them? They get combined with the O2, the oxygen that we breathe. When they combine with the O2, given that they are negative electrons, the protons are like, yeah, I'm going in there too. They're attracted to that negativity. And you end up having hydrogen and oxygen together. So, as you already know, what's created is H2O, which is a very normal product for us to deal with, and something that we handle very well, right? Our whole body is filled with water. So as you can see, oxygen is incredibly important to accept those depleted electrons. If they are not accepted, if we could not breathe in the oxygen to be able to turn it into water, the entire system shuts down. You cannot continue to charge and to create NADH, FADH, and all of these things. And you cannot continue to do that without electrons, without this breakdown, without oxygen being able to accept them at the end. So very quickly, when an organism like humans do not have oxygen, this system completely shuts down. You cannot do aerobic respiration, and the system has to do only glycolysis. Or like we just said, that the energy production of glycolysis is just very low, and it's just not enough. And it could really harm a person very quickly. Very little air or no air will lead to death very quickly. All right, so adenosine triphosphate is ATP. It is what stores and transports energy in cells, and it's like a battery that you recharge. ATP, ADP is the one that has to be recharged. ATP has been charged. So it continuously cycles as ADP and ATP, ADP, ATP. Uncharged, charged. So the body just continues to use it over and over again. So as you can see in the right side, we have 2 ATP in glycolysis, 2 in the Krebs cycle, and in the 30s in the electron transport chain. That's very high levels in the electron transport chain. And that's not just one electron transport chain. It's many in each mitochondria, and you have many. And not only that, but this is for every molecule of glucose that comes in. And man, there's a lot of molecules of glucose that come in when you eat something and when you break down something. So all of this is used to make your muscles move, to allow you to be able to breathe and think and create things. It is absolutely needed to do all of this. If you don't have it, you just don't survive. So why is cellular respiration important? It is important for, like I said, movement. It's specifically related to something that's important to you as a psychology student. It's important for brain function. You cannot think right without the proper ATP. It's important for repair, for growth, to keep the body balanced, homeostasis. You just die without the energy. So it is the reason you're sitting here. It is the reason you're breathing. It is the reason that your body can function properly. And as you all know, without being able to take in the oxygen and to continue the process of cellular respiration, you don't last very long. But consider the questions. Why is oxygen important in cellular respiration? And where is the most ATP produced? Why does this happen like that? If you consider them, get comfortable with them, look at the big picture, and then look at the more detailed picture. So I wanted to just remind you one more time that this is all interconnected. Energy allows the chloroplasts to produce what is needed for the mitochondria to create energy or to produce the energy, charge the energy that the body needs, that the plant needs, that our bodies need, that animals need, all of it. So, and then the mitochondria release what is needed for the chloroplast to do this process. It is interconnected. You cannot separate these two. And I also wanted to remind you of this phospholipid bilayer, this incredible membrane, which you should know very detailed by now, and the way that it allows things to come in and out, the way that it drives ATP synthase by allowing protons to come in only in one place, not anywhere else, and therefore drive the motor that charges ATP. So I like this picture because it gives not only a reminder of that lipid bilayer, but also of the basic processes. Like you have glycolysis outside of the mitochondria. Then you have the citric acid cycle, also known as the Krebs cycle, right there in the center. And then you have the arrow pointing to the electron transport chain up on the top right. Okay, now I would like for you all to watch the video that I found for you, which I think will just bring everything together and give you a good reminder of everything that we have discussed. And please keep it from broad to more complicated, right? To dig deeper into the center of what is really going on. That's why I gave you these last two pictures. Think of the big picture and then zoom in to the little picture and consider what it is that goes on with the electron carriers, what happens where, and how much energy is produced.